All right, we are going to get started this afternoon. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today for this really important topic. My name is Erin Teggy. I am with Peer Services and Glenview Northbrook Coalition for Youth. And we are really excited to have Lisa Ehrlich here from Response for Teen, which through JCFS to talk about this really important topic about healthy relationships for our teens. This webinar is being recorded. It will be made available after the webinar is over. You will receive a link for that recording in your email later this week, or feel free to go to gncy.org and it will also be available there. But we will definitely make sure you have access to this at a later date. We know it's hard to remember everything we hear in webinars, so we want to make sure you have access to this really important resources. So feel free to use the Q&A and the chat throughout the webinar. I know Lisa has some questions and ways for us to interact over the next hour, and we will definitely get to questions at the end. And if you happen to think of one later, you can always email us and we can get those answers to you. So I'm going to pass it over to Lisa and she will get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Erin. Erin and Anne, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak with parents and caregivers about this topic. I think especially this is the month of February, and some people call it the month of love, like we talk about Valentine's Day. It's also Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And so what better time to talk about boundaries and relationships and how to talk about that with your young people. I am going to share my screen in 1 second. And I really want to make sure that we jump right in so that so that we are able to make sure that we have time for questions. I will give you a quick word about myself just because I think knowing a little bit about the person who's in front of you is always important. So my name is Lisa Ehrlich. I live in Chicago. I am the manager of education from Response for Teens. And before that, I was a high school teacher for 15 years in multiple different subject areas, and really left the classroom because I wanted to focus on these types of this type of work. And so I found Response for Teens as a part of JCFS. And I love what Response for Teens does. So I will tell you really quickly that we are a program of JCF Chicago that is dedicated to empowering young people to make healthy decisions. What that means is it's young people's and the adults who are in community with them. And so Response really has two main kind of areas, and one is clinical, right? We have therapists who are dedicated to working with young people and the adults who support them in order to help them work through the difficulties of adolescence. And then you have me and my team, and we are education, and we do comprehensive sexual health, healthy relationship, and mental wellness education and programming in all different forms. So in standalone programs, but we also work in public, private schools, and do programs with places like libraries, anywhere that we can reach youth and the adults who support them. We also have leadership programming. And at the end, I will plug a little bit for our leadership programming, but I'm going to hold off right now. So here is my first question. And if you would like to respond in the chat, feel free. When you think of relationships and young people, what words come to mind? And just don't overthink it. If you want to put a couple of words in the chat, that would be great. impulsive, thank you, confusing, risky behaviors, intense. All of these are amazing. Confusing, emotional, fickle. Yes, I will tell you, I'm also a parent. Someone put in respecting their independence and desire to pull away from parents. Thank you. Yep. Myopic. Definitely. I will tell you, all of your words are way better than mine. So, oops, I clicked the wrong button, right? So really think about this. Your words are so much better. They were way more descriptive. I thought more along the lines of drama, social media, friends, peer pressure, romantic partners, and everything that you put in, right? Myopic, fickle, intense, confusing, emotional, risky behaviors. All of those fall into these things that are on the screen, right? They're all a part of it. And a huge reason we're going to look at the adolescent brain for a tiny second is really about what they are supposed to be going through as adolescents. I will say that even though they are supposed to be going through this, it does not make the job of being an adult who cares about them and is worried about them any easier. Okay. So with that, we're kind of all on the same page. We really kind of are understanding why we are taught, why we are here. I have a couple of learning objectives. We're going to develop common language around boundaries and consent, differentiate adolescent relationships from adult relationships, identify unhealthy behavior in any relationship, and really kind of the focus at the end, where hopefully I will spend the most time, is building tools for communicating with your young people about healthy relationships. Okay. Here are the boundaries basics. Boundaries are personal limits of what a person likes and doesn't like or find uncomfortable, right? So when we talk about boundaries with our young people, and we talk about boundaries from, we do 5th grade all the way up. And we talk about this starting in 5th grade. And actually, with my own children, we talk about it even younger. And we talk about it like this: material, right? So it can be material, lending, asking for money, sharing possessions. We all know a huge thing of teens is do not come into my room if I have not let you, right? And that's a thing about privacy. Physical, control over one's body, deciding who gets to touch, what is touched, how they're touched. Mental, right? So expressing thoughts and opinions, the right to disagree. Mental is often difficult, and one of the places that unfortunately adults stifle young people without necessarily even realizing it. The other mental is really thinking about what mental things you're comfortable with, right? Like a lot of young people talk about, I'm not comfortable if you talk about such and such in front of me, or I'm not comfortable. I'll tell this person my secret, but I won't tell this person, right? So we have different boundaries with different people. And then emotional, right? Private thoughts and feelings. And so often what is so difficult as an adult with adolescents is that we see that something is going on, we ask what is going on, and we get nothing. You don't understand. And there's a wall, and it feels extremely frustrating. And I can tell you my urge as a parent is to push, and I really have to sometimes step on the brakes. And really think about where my children's boundaries are. Okay. Another language that we use quite often is, this is from Planned Parenthood. And we use this because it is just really clear and easy. And I also love mnemonic devices. So One is fries, right? When we talk about consent, often, unfortunately, when we talk about consent, so much because of media, because of everything, it is only thought about in sexual terms, right? But consent needs to be talked about in terms of anything. We give consent all the time. It's giving permission, right? And so this is how we talk about it in terms of sexual consent, but this really can apply to anything. And that's also really important because some teenagers, right, we make assumptions that talking about relationships and consent is only when it's a romantic or sexual relationship. There are some young people who will not have those relationships. Either they are not interested or they haven't found the relationship yet. And a lot of times that leads to either not having the discussion or to them turning off when it is about sexual relationships. And the truth is that friendships can also be non-consensual and can actually be really unhealthy. And so talking about this in terms of the fact that this can be a romantic and sexual relationship, it's also in everything we do is really important to remember. So freely given, right? No coercion, right? Someone didn't guilt you into it. Someone didn't force you. You are not intoxicated, right? You are fully aware of what is going on and you are able to say yes. Reversible. At any point in time, consent can be revoked, right? We talk about a lot in sexual relationships that you might be making out and all of a sudden it doesn't feel comfortable anymore. Consent is revoked. In a non sexual relationship, it might be that you are fine. You know, when we think of COVID, right? It might be that a young person, I can use myself. I used to be fine. Like I would hand my cup, I'd be like, okay, with my friends, I would hand my cup to someone. Well, now I'm not so comfortable anymore, right? And so my boundaries change. Informed. When we talk about sexual relationships, a lot of time this refers to two things. One is STI or STD status, right? Really making sure that you know what's going on. But the other thing is making sure that both partners know what they are talking about. The world is full of slang, right? And we talk about the words like hooking up and Netflix and chill. And hooking up to one person might mean kissing and it might mean sex to another, right? And so being really clear about what you're actually saying yes to is really important. Enthusiastic. This is a lot where talking about verbal and nonverbal signals come in, right? Sometimes I talk about playing sports or tossing a ball. How do you know if somebody's open, right? Eye contact, waving, getting your attention, yelling, I'm open. In terms of relationships, it's saying, like, yes, I want this, pulling them closer. If you're asking to share something, going and getting it for you and handing it to you, right? That sometimes even a verbal yes, when the person's volume shifts, they won't make eye contact anymore. That is no longer enthusiastic, even if it's a verbal yes, and thinking about how important that is. And then the last one is specific. And specific goes into, I think of like two things, right? And one is literally what you are consenting to, right? So if we talk about a sexual relationship, I might consent to kissing. That does not mean that just because I consented to kissing, that I am consenting to anything else, right? You need to consent at each step. The other thing that I think about with specific is each time. Consent is not a switch, especially in young relationships. Consent should not be a switch that is just flipped on and you assume that you always have consent. And I think about with friends and pushing personal boundaries, or my daughter let me into her room on Wednesday. On Friday, I was no longer allowed in her room without knocking. And that's okay because her boundaries are shifting. And the most important thing about consent is that we don't assume, we check in. And so that way, I'm not breaking someone's boundaries. And understanding that assuming whether someone's okay with something, as awkward as sometimes it might be to start asking if they're okay, assuming is actually a lot of times where we end up crossing people's boundaries. All right. So the next thing that we talk about, and it's really important to think about relationships, is power dynamics, right? Very simply, power is the relationship, is the ability to impact the way a person thinks, feels, and acts. We all have power. And when we talk with young people, we really explain that power is a thing. It's not good or bad, but it's how it presents itself. It's the dynamic and how it's used. All relationships have power dynamics. And what we think about and the way we talk about it when we talk with people are unequal power dynamics and equal power dynamics. And we talk about relationships, right? There are some relationships that need to have unequal power dynamics, right? Unequal power dynamics, when it's healthy, does not mean that, so a parent and child, it does not mean that the parent doesn't respect the child. It doesn't mean that the child doesn't have power. A child completely influences what parents do. But what it means is that parents and children, for example, do not have equal power for all hosts of reasons. And the biggest one is that parents and guardians are legally responsible for the safety of their children. They've lived longer, they know more, they have more available to them. And so the dynamic needs to be unequal. Does that mean that there can't be abuse even if it's meant to be unequal? No, of course. A relationship, any relationship can be unhealthy. Same thing, teacher student, right? Those are supposed to have unequal power dynamics. However, what we talk about is with friendships and romantic relationships, there should be an equal power dynamic. And one of the ways that we establish that is a very simple question. How many of you have ever done something or gone to something for a friend that you don't really enjoy? It doesn't hurt you, but it's just not your favorite thing. Like I usually think about like going to a movie or watching something. But you do it because it's really important for your friend. Almost every kid raises their hand. And then you say, okay, switch it. Has your friend also done that for you? Most kids raise their hands. And we say, that is because there's a give and take of how you are influencing each other because you care. If in a friendship, you are always doing what the other friend wants, that is not equal. And it means that the friend is not thinking about you in an equal way, right? And so we really kind of talk through friendship first, and then we start thinking about relationships. But the importance is give and take. So a big thing that is important in talking with relationships, especially as young people are adolescents, is privacy versus secrecy. Someone put, I can't remember if it was in the chat or in the Q&A as an answer, they put in that kind of pushing away and seeking independence from parents. 100%. Adolescents are supposed to be doing this right now, right? And they are also, as scary as it is, supposed to be taking risks. That means that they might not be telling you everything. That means that they might have some things that are private. There is a difference, however, between privacy and secrecy. So if you want to throw in the chat your thoughts of what might be a difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy equals bathroom usage, yes. And secrecy equals drugs. Sorry, my laughter, I will just be very clear, and I know this is being recorded. We had a big phase in my house from when the kids were little and getting them into where we had to remind them to shut the door when they were going to the bathroom. But yes, privacy equals bathroom usage. Secrecy can equal drugs. There's something in the Q&A. That is a great question. Someone put in the chat, I would love to know how to explain to my teen that texts are not secret without them feeling I'm invading their privacy. I want to make sure. I'm going to ask a quick question. Erin, when this question will stay in there so I can get to it after, correct?
Yes, it will.
Thank you. Secrecy is hiding, right? And a lot of times with hiding, when we hide something, it's fear, right? Fear or shame. So that is definitely thinking too. Privacy might be condoned behavior. Secrecy is not. Very possibly. And thinking about how you figure out what condoned behavior is in your own house is also really important. These are all really great answers. Okay. So the thing is with this is that everyone has a right to private thoughts and feelings. But like you all said, secrecy involves hiding something, right? So when we think about why people keep secrets, a lot of times it is about shame. A lot of times it is about fear or knowing they are and this is fear, knowing they are doing something that you disapprove of. Or sometimes, especially when it is around potentially sexuality, not just sexual experience, but like gender and identity and sexuality, sometimes it is a fear placed on a parent, like projected onto a parent, that is sometimes secrecy, right? There are tons of kids who come out at school first, regardless of what the parents are doing at home. And it is really about that parent-child relationship and the idea that children are afraid of disappointing their parents. And sometimes a parent can be as warm and welcoming as possible, and a child will still be afraid of disappointing their parents, right? And so one of the things to think about is really finding that balance and talking with your kids about privacy, that understanding what privacy is. With the text messages, different families have different rules around tech, right? And that is something that needs to be discussed with each family. And part of the reason around it and the way that you can talk about it, if your family chooses to read text messages, right, that they're not private, right? And a lot of families feel that way. The way thinking about how to frame it is, while it feels like it's an invasion of privacy, right? It's my way of keeping you safe. And what it might be is to open the conversation with your young person about, okay, well, if that really feels like an invasion of your privacy, what can we do together? Because here's how I feel, here's how you feel. We need to find a common ground. And what that might mean is that you talk to them through or about when you want to look at their texts. So it's not a random pull, right? There are all different things, and I can follow up with some more information about that. But a really big thing, right? We can tell our young people not to keep things from us. Like, don't lie. Don't hide things from me. I'm always open. I'll be here for you. The problem is that kids don't trust words a lot, right? And so what we need to do is model honesty and appropriate vulnerability, right? So modeling honesty about when we mess up, modeling honesty about what a time where we have not wanted to tell them something, but because it's private, not a secret, right? So talking with young people through the difference, but actually, as a teacher, you call it a think aloud when you are teaching kids how to do a skill and you're literally talking through what you do. And so sometimes it's really about talking through the decisions that you make and modeling appropriate vulnerability. And one of those is like with that question, I don't know what to do about the phone because it's my way of keeping you safe, but you feel that it's an invasion of privacy. Where can we find common ground? When they do tell us things, it's really important to be mindful of our reactions. We need to respond, not react, right? And so that means that we have to check what it is that we are responding to, right? Is it our fear? Is it, my young person will tell me something or I'll see her do something that is not that big of a deal. But what it does for me is I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. As a parent, I spiral 10 steps ahead, 5 years ahead, and my reaction is not proportional to what she is telling me, right? My fear, she lies to me sometimes. Like she will get up and sneak something and she'll tell me it's an apple and it's a cookie, like at 4 a.m. My reaction is not about that particular lie. My reaction is about the fact she's in 7th grade, that I'm afraid that if it's something bigger, she's going to lie, right? And so my reactions used to be really big. And then I started working on it and realizing, because she's now afraid. She's afraid to tell me. And so really think about how we respond when we are worried or angry or scared. They are going to take that and use that. It will be stamped into their brain. And the thing to think about really is that honesty and safety are more important than consequences, right? It does not mean that there shouldn't be consequences. There are consequences in my house, but it means that in the moment, figuring out honesty and safety and ensuring honesty and safety are what's important. Okay. So when we talk about boundaries, right? So those are where common things to think about with the relationships. But when we talk about boundaries, a lot of times young people, especially when we talk about consent, are expected to know their boundaries ahead of time, right? Like they're expected to know that they don't feel comfortable with this. Otherwise, they would say no. But the problem is that we learn boundaries in 2 ways. So the first one is self-reflection, right? What do I know that I like? What do I know that I don't like? That can be around anything, right? Boundaries around touch, how much time we spend together, what is shared with others, right? A perfect example that is not sexual is think about your own reaction and what you need physically when you are really upset. In my home, the 4 people in my home all have very different boundaries around that. Specifically, I do not want to be touched when I am upset. My partner wants to be hugged when he is upset. And my children have their own sets, right? So we figured that out. And you learn that through the other way, experimentation. Most times we actually don't know what our boundaries are until we run into them, right? Especially in relationships and sexual relationships when things are so new and so fraught with like nerves and anxiety and wanting to do things right and to not be judged, right? But that somewhere understanding that balance, and this is where talking about experimentation of boundaries, understanding the balance of being nervous versus something doesn't feel right. And really talking to your kids about how do they know the difference, right? But we can't expect young people to know their boundaries without life experiences. And that's where adolescence and risk taking comes in. So within these, around boundaries, thinking about how you can support your young people. So one of the things is to observe patterns, right? Help your kids identify patterns in their own behavior, right? To help them learn to name their own boundaries. One could be, you don't seem to like it when Kate texts you late at night. Just an observation, right? When you talk about boundaries, it doesn't have to be these giant sit downs. Just an observation, and you open the door for them to talk about it. Another one, right, is helping people develop kind of their internal understanding. For younger kids, it's much more like, thinking about going to a sleepover. We have an example that's going to a sleepover. But for kids who are thinking about relationships and peer pressure and drugs and sex, how do you know the difference? I wonder how you know the difference between feeling nervous and feeling like something's not right. A lot of times we don't have those conversations with our young people. And then always validate and empathize, right? Let them know that it is okay to change their mind and advocate for themselves when things change. Sometimes we think we want to do something and then we realize we're uncomfortable. Always speak up when that happens. I'm going to add something to this though, because speaking out can be terrifying. And so even validating, right? What can you do when you are feeling comfortable if you are afraid to speak out? Giving your kids options so that they don't feel like if they don't speak out, they're failing is really important. Okay. Oops. All right. The other thing to think about with boundaries is that it's really important to also talk about how to respond, because it's not just our country, but overall, we don't talk about boundaries. We don't talk about what happens when we cross boundaries, right? Instead, we do this thing where we live by the golden rule, which is treat others the way you want to be treated. I kind of throw out the golden rule because what it really should be is treat others the way they want to be treated. But we don't. And we don't mean to hurt people sometimes, right? So if there's a friend who, or even a partner, right? A boyfriend, a girlfriend, a relationship partner, right? Who hugs every time they see you, every time they see your young person. And all of a sudden, the next time the young person looks and says, oh, why are you always hugging me? Because their boundary has been crossed so many times and they haven't wanted to say something over and over because they don't want to hurt the person until it's too much. And then what happens is that the other person is really hurt and then also responds. So, what's important to talk about boundaries is why it's so important to talk about boundaries and how to react when you get messages like this that sometimes seem hurtful, right? Don't touch my stuff without asking. It's mine. How does your young person respond to that? How do they feel? And what might the other person be feeling, right? Really encourage them to try outside of a hot moment. So we call them in cool moments to think through how to empathize with a person who might have hurt your feelings because you crossed their boundary. Okay. All right. So a really simple scenario. I'm going to check the time. Okay. You're in the car with your child and you can decide on the age of your child. After they spent the night at Jordan's house, when you ask how the sleepover was, they say, it was okay, but Jordan talked to me until 2 a.m. and I didn't get much sleep. After another sleepover a few weeks later, they explained that Jordan put on a scary movie, or it can be any type of movie that made me really uncomfortable. right? So I'm going to show you, since this is all webinar based, I'm going to show you kind of some ways to use those observable, those things that we went through. Observable patterns. You don't seem to like sleeping over at Jordan's. Wonder aloud. And this doesn't, wonder alouds are great because they can be done at any time. I wonder why people think sleepovers are so fun, right? So it can be in the moment. It can also be later, where your child might be exhausted and it might not be the best time to be talking about it. Wonder alouds are really great ways to enter into conversations. Validate and empathize. Sometimes we think we want to sleep at a friend's house and realize we're uncomfortable once we get there. It's totally okay to change your mind and be picked up, or it's totally okay to get in your car and go home. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. So with kind of explaining really what boundaries look like, it's important before we go on into unhealthy behaviors to really understand just a little bit about the adolescent brain. I will tell you, I have an entire hour-long presentation that is designed to talk about the wonderful and yet mind-boggling adolescent brain, because it is wonderful and doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and yet it makes parents' lives really difficult. So here's what I'm going to show you in my little picture. So first, where the light bulb is, that is the prefrontal cortex, right? That is decision making. That is really what we think about reasoning, right? So young people, it is what as adults helps us think through decisions, make critical decisions, and also sometimes it helps us when we're having really big emotions, right? Like our fight or flight response, really big emotions. It's kind of what helps us calm down. In the middle is the reward center for the brain, right? So that is when you feel real good, you get a rush of dopamine from doing something well, from getting an award, from winning, scoring a goal. During adolescence, especially around seventh grade up to around 10th grade, right? That is peer approval actually lights up the reward center of the brain, right? So peer approval is a reward and it is something they continually seek, right? And part of that is on purpose because their brain is starting to structure, so they are basically learning to live separately from parents. The thing is with that, I'm like pointing to it on my computer, but with the prefrontal cortex, right? What happens with risk taking during the brain is it's called pruning. And what that means is that they have all of these risky experiences and the brain starts making all of these connections that later, when they have as adults, after 25, when it's fully formed and they start making these decisions, their brain goes back to the experiences that they had before. And part of it is really important. They do it because you support them, right? And thinking about how to support safer risks is really important. Also understanding that risk taking can look different for every child. Trying out for a play could be a risk. Not doing an assignment could be a risk. Calling a friend, telling a friend that they have a boundary that's been crossed. Those can be really scary and those are risks. So the big thing to think about a lot of times as adults, when we think about the fact that our kids don't think through risks, they don't as much. They are more impulsive. However, they're coming to learn a little bit more about the brain in the sense that actually teens weigh risks a little bit more than we give them credit for, but there's a difference. As adults, we think of a loss of peer approval versus, who knows? It could be getting detention, getting expelled, As adults, we're like, loss of peer approval, that's not much of a risk. This is the way higher risk because it's going to affect your future. We have the ability to long think. Teens peer pressure, peer approval is so important that that's actually the higher risk. Losing their friends is actually the higher risk. So when we think that they don't weigh it, they do, but their brains are wired so that peer approval is actually more important. Talking them through in cold moments, right, in cool moments, talking them through decisions that they've made or how they're going to make decisions is actually really helpful for their brain development. The other thing that I want you to think about is when we talk specifically about relationships and like romantic relationships, I want you to think about the difference in time span for an adult versus a young person. So, say a junior in high school versus I'm 43 versus a 43-year-old. Think about a relationship that lasted a month. When a young person has a relationship that lasts for a month, a lot of adults think about their own relationships, and the idea is, well, that's not that long in the scheme of things. However, you have to remember that if someone is 17 years old compared to a 43-year-old or a 50-year-old, a month, I cannot do math, but a month in their life is taking up way more of their life proportionally than it is in ours. And so when we minimize the impact of a relationship because of the length of time, it actually completely invalidates what our young people are feeling about their relationships. Okay. I hope it's okay. I'm speeding through a lot of this so that I make sure that we have time for questions at the end. So, oops, hold on one second. Just so you know, this little image that I have is from That's Not Love, and that is actually a wonderful website for resources around healthy relationships. Okay, so one of the things to think about, especially with your young people, if you've never been in a romantic relationship before, you might not know that behaviors are unhealthy. When they're not romantic relationships, you might also not think about friendships as being unhealthy, right? So if you could throw in the chat really quickly, where do young people learn about romantic relationships? Movies, TV, brothers and sisters, social media, parents, TV with a frowny face, Instagram, TV friends, family, yes. TikTok, their friends, yes. All of these places. Yep. And I'm going to check what they observe in home, stories, TV, books, movies, peers, parents. Okay. Right. So with that, almost everybody put something about TV, movies, or social media, and even books. How does the media portray unhealthy behaviors from your experience? Throw that in the chat. Not always unhealthy enough to capture it. They sensationalize them. Ah, thank you, Erin. Seems more extreme, like it won't actually happen that way. Right? So like, I mean, this is not an unhealthy behavior, but I will tell you, I think all the time about how sexual assault and rape was portrayed in TV growing up, and it was always a stranger. It was always this horrible stranger attack. Versus until I watched A Different World, and there was an episode of um, an attempted rape on a date, right? Exaggerated, not always realistic. Great. Let me ask you a question. Does anybody think that some of these are actually, sometimes unhealthy behaviors are actually shown as romantic and acceptable? A favorite of mine, which is not right now, it's telling you how old I am, but is actually The Notebook. The Notebook, and the way that the dating starts is like this sweep this person off their feet romance, and it was actually completely coerced. Um, and thinking about some of these unhealthy behaviors um, as this like once in a lifetime, so intense romance, right? That sometimes our young people question that if they're not feeling these really, really intense feelings where they can't be without the other person, that something's wrong. Just gonna check. Thank you. Issues, Julia Michaels, Beautiful Trauma, Pink, songs that romanticize unhealthy relationships, for example. Yes. And I will tell you, like, we actually have a whole lesson for young people that looks at both clips of TV and movies, and then we do we keep changing them, but we do popular song lyrics that looks at healthy and unhealthy relationships. Um, I think Nick Jonas had a song called Jealous, right? And it's this idea that he should be able to do what he wants because he's jealous. Um, and we romanticize these, but we also normalize them, right? Because we watch them so much, because TikTok has these shows really sometimes negative, extreme, hurtful relationships that a lot of times our young people were like, well, if it's not that, then I'm okay, right? And so one of the things is that we start to normalize this idea of unhealthy, right? So if you haven't been in a relationship, you might not know these. You might not recognize it. And I will tell you, as a teacher of high school students, this was continually something that came up. Jealousy. They love me so much, they can't stand to think of me with other people. Or something that was common is, for example, if this was a heterosexual relationship, um, he just loves me so much that I can't hang out with other guys, or he wants me to unfriend other guys, right? So that is a jealousy, right? And we can feel jealous, and that's an important thing to explain. Feeling jealousy is one thing, acting on jealousy is another. Possessiveness, right? They're just trying to be protective, right? Of saying, like, I don't want you going there, or that's not good for you. Or another thing, and this is kind of a mix between possessiveness and controlling. I had a student, this is a little unusual, but I had a student who I taught gender studies, and we were doing a whole unit on this, and started explaining her partner in a positive light, saying, oh, well, he asked me to send pictures of how I'm dressed in the morning before I come to school because he really cares about me and doesn't want people to think badly of me. Doesn't want people to think that her words were that I'm a hoe. And literally, as the words were coming out of her mouth, she was like, oh. I was like, yeah, right? He's not being protective. He's controlling you about what you wear and making you feel bad about yourself if you don't do what he wants. That's power, right? They care about me and want the best for me, right? Not letting them make their own choices, pulling them away from family, right? Like really thinking about how they are the people that care for them, not other people. Stalking and harassment. And here's the thing, right? Like we use the term stalking and harassment and we're a little afraid of those terms because of how the media has portrayed them. But they love me. They can't stop calling me and texting me. They just want to know where I am all the time, right? Or, you know, hanging out with friends. Your friend has a new partner And their romantic partner says, okay, we're going to go hang out with our friends separately tonight. And the partner shows up coincidentally where they are, or the partner texts all the time during that evening, right? This idea of just not allowing a person to have individuality. Okay. Excuse me. So, think about this. Casey has started hanging out with a new friend, Jaden. Jaden seems pleasant and is always very respectful to you when they are over at your house. Recently, you've noticed that Casey is constantly texting and won't talk to you about it. Excuse me. You have a rule that phones are not allowed at dinner. Casey receives a text, takes out their phone, and becomes anxious when you tell them to put it away. They say, Jaden gets upset when I don't respond quickly. Take a second, and if you want to put it in the chat, you can, but let's just think about it. What do you say? What do you think, first of all, and what do you say? So I think Jaden may be controlling, but also Jaden may be insecure, right? Great. And one of the things to think about, maybe you could talk to Jaden about responding when you're able. These are great. And one of the things to think about, unfortunately, is the minefield that sometimes is talking to our teenagers. If we use words like controlling, we have to be careful because it might all of a sudden be like we might get shut out immediately, right? So how do you feel about your friendship, or how do you feel about your relationship with Jaden? Great. How do you feel about talking to Jaden? It seems like Jaden gets really upset. How does that make you feel? Right, you think, yikes, this is not healthy. And you say, perhaps you can let Jaden know that we're no family at dinner time, right? Is that okay, right? Because there's also something that you're noticing that your kid is responding. So your young person is already anxious, right? So it means that there's already a bit of a power imbalance going on in this relationship, and that they are anxious. So thinking about it might not be this moment to talk about it. Remember, you can always press pause and come back to it. And you can say that verbally. Be like, hey, it seems that this is making you really anxious. We don't have to talk about it now, but can we come back to this? So maybe we can look at how you feel about your relationship with Jaden, right? And then use those tools, right? Like thinking about making a statement. Think about how you can enter into that conversation. Oh, excuse me, one second. Sorry about that. Right? So in those relationships, thinking about how to do it in cool moments. Because I actually would not do it at the table. I would say, like, this is making you really anxious. Let's do this one time, and then we're going to talk about it later. Because in the moment, your young person is already heightened because they are feeling like they're anxious because they don't want to disappoint Jaden. So they're already activated. So letting them know that you're like how you enter into it with letting them know that you have a problem with this is going to just activate them more, because then they feel they're stuck in the middle. And so telling them with empathy, like that you see how much this is upsetting them, that you're not going to talk about it now, you're going to let them deal with Jaden, but then you're going to talk about it and really talk about your boundaries as a family, right? And how to enter into this discussion with Jaden and ask them questions. In general, some really important general tips. What values do you want your child to bring all relationships that they encounter in their lives? We cannot assume that our kids are going to do that because it needs to be modeled. And sometimes they need to hear it, right? Um, so, modeling, think about your own values, your expectations of relationships. How do you show them? How do you want kids to treat each other? Um, how do you treat kids, friends, and family with respect, right? Young kids and older kids learn from watching you. It reminds me of, I think I was in high school and it was like that. I learned it from you, Dad. And that was like about drugs, but they do. They learn from watching us and they watch us when we screw up more than when we think that we're doing something well. And so owning it when you aren't behaving well. I have a temper and I'm working on it and I own it when I mess up. And it's really important to see that you are also a work in progress. Acknowledging that young people's relationships matter. Young people are poised already to think that adults do not respect their relationships because in so many other parts of their world, they are invalidated. Show them that you know how much they matter and that their relationships matter. Tell the truth, the good and the bad, right? You don't need to hide things about unhealthy relationships in both peer and romantic relationships. But you need to keep your boundaries clear that manipulation and violence aren't acceptable. And then encourage open communication, right? Especially, this is the privacy versus secrecy. It's really great to have special moments with a significant other, or even really like secret, like inside jokes with friends. But you need to be careful that special moments aren't taking over the relationship because that's isolation. And isolation can be the first sign of manipulation in an unhealthy relationship. Oh my goodness. Okay. Some of the things to think about, right? And these are general questions, but they can be used specifically to talk in specific relationships. What makes them feel happy in a friendship or romantic relationship, right? I ask my daughters all the time, like, what do you like about that friendship? Like, what makes you feel good about that friend? And we do it in conversation, so it doesn't feel like an interrogation. What specific bother them? Why are they a problem? And then you can take it that next step and say, okay, well, what can you do about it? What do they consider okay behavior in a friendship or a relationship? Do they think name calling is okay? And sometimes that starts really young, right? Think about how we would say it to older. Like, do you think giving someone a nickname or like making a joke about someone is okay? Encourage them to be specific because a lot of times they'll be like, well, it's just a joke. Why is that okay? What might they do if a friend or romantic partner made them feel uncomfortable, right? A lot of times, because we don't talk about it, our kids don't think about it. And then they get stuck in a situation where they are uncomfortable and don't know what to do. So the sooner in just kind of cool conversations that we can find ways to talk to them about it, the better. And then where do they see, oops, sorry if you heard that. Where do they see concerning behavior on social media, at school? A really great tool is using teachable moments in social media and if you watch TV. I mean, there's so many TV shows. Everyone goes toward Euphoria because it is mind blowing, right? But regular TV shows, regular movies do not treat each other healthily all the time, right? Where do they see concerning behavior? Why is it concerning? How do you know these people are in a healthy relationship? I want to give you a special word about tech. Um, our kids are tech natives, are digital natives, and I can say I am not. Like our generation is not. We might be really good at it, but we are not digital natives. So sometimes the unhealthy behaviors might not be as obvious. Excessive text, harassing posts, all of that are really big red flags. And it's important to start talking about those early because teen needs to understand that that's not how people should act on social media. Talk about healthy communication. Talk about how to respond when something hurts you, when to have a conversation in person, when to have it over the phone, and when it's okay to text back or post back. Talk about how to handle requests for inappropriate pictures, right? That it's not their fault, but to stop the person, block the person, and to tell someone. And then also to talk about the consequences of what is posted on social media or sent by text, but not to scare them, right? Just like it doesn't go away. And we think about like what you need to think about and how you think about it so that what you are posting is kind, so that what you are posting is helpful. I want to check the time. It is 1:02. Um, I'm going to skip this scenario. Okay, so even just looking at this one, your child has started spending more time with Sam, and it seems like they're more than friends. You've asked if they're interested in kissing Sam, but your child says it's none of your business. You want to make sure they know how to ask for consent with a sexual partner. What might be, from what we've talked about, a way to enter into the conversation? Sorry if you hear dinging. There is a meeting going on, and I can't figure out how to turn off the notification. So in the interest of time, I'm going to say one of the things that you can do, approaching the conversation, right? They've said it's none of your business. Okay. One of the things to do is to keep the door open. You say, okay, I'm here for you when you want to talk. And you leave. I would say, yes, it is my business. Hold on. Hold on. Woo, they all came in. All right. Yes, it is my business because you are my child and I love you. Yes, we got to be careful only about I love the because you're my child and I love you. Only because I would take it in with I get that you want this to be private and that it freaks you out that I'm your mom and asking you, right? Thinking about coming back with, yes, it is my business, feels like a direct slam on them. So you want to almost take it in the affirmative and then flip it to them, right? Um, and leave it open. The other thing to think about too is sometimes you might not, as much as parents, we want to be the person that our kids go to. Finding a village, finding a couple of adults that you really trust them and what they will say, give your kid them. I am that person for a couple of my friends' kids, right? That if they don't feel comfortable going to their parents, they come to me. And they know, though, that if it's big and I think they're not safe, we're going to the parents, right? I might tell them, you don't need to share details with me that you want to keep private, but I just want you to listen. I just want to listen and make sure you have a place to come and ask questions. That's great. That's great. And I think too, but even approaching the conversation differently, not even bringing up Sam. Like, thinking about watching TV, right? And two characters kiss. How do they know? How do you know? Like, or an observation. How do you know when you want to kiss somebody? Or how did that character know that they want to kiss it? And they might roll their eyes, but they're you're sending the message that you want to make sure that you're talking about this, right? And so there's a couple of ways to get into it and a couple of times that you can go back to it. All right, I want to make sure that I'm wrapping up. Okay. So with that, I am going to do two things. One, I want to open up for questions. I'm also going to put, so this is a link to Response's website, and we made two guides, one for middle school parents and one for high school parents. And they're just really, they're broad guides about how to talk to your young people about sex and relationships. And they are also full of resources. So if you want to go there and kind of browse around, it is in multiple languages. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. But I am going to stop sharing. And make sure, and I also, there are two questions in the Q&A. And then also, I'm not sure where necessarily all of the parents are tuning in from, but if your students are high school age, Erin in the resources will send out, we actually, Response for Teens has our snowball weekend, excuse me, coming up. And it is a weekend retreat planned by teens, led by teens, all around all of these types of topics and fun. And kids love it. And it is March 11th through 13th. And registration is open for it. And we would love to have your kids with us. It is a wonderful program, and the teens have been working since October to plan it. Let me look at two of these questions, and if there are any other questions. I would love to know how to explain to my teen that texts are not a secret without them feeling you're invading your privacy. I think we kind of already talked about that in terms of really making it a discussion about finding common ground. And then if we already have that history of reacting strongly because we're anticipating 10 steps ahead, and we can tell our kids already have developed fear of our reactions, how easily is this undone? If we switch to responding instead of reacting, will these neural pathways of fear in our kids get rewired? Yes, but not quickly, right? And there's some vulnerability involved, right? That is going to mean literally telling them that you know that you've reacted in the past. And I will tell you, I'm even doing it with my one daughter, right? Because there are a couple things that I react to. So we are working on it. And I say, and sometimes I have to look and say, I'm feeling an emotion right now that is about me, not about you. So I'm going to deal with my emotion. And if it's okay, I'm going to come and talk after, right? So it feels weird. It feels weird to narrate that and to narrate that we are dealing with our own emotions. But kids don't always see their parents as fallible humans. And allowing them to see us as fallible humans who are working to fix the way we respond to them actually is really powerful. Are there any other questions?
Doesn't look like it, unless you're gonna pop in. But we are, just about on time. I know some folks had to jump off already. I will make sure. Oh, I think something just jumped in Q&A. We will definitely make sure to get all the resources, the recording links, everything to folks. And hopefully Lisa can answer these last couple questions that just popped in.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so there is one, I need a little clarification. Like to know more tips on how to keep our teens around us more at home. So what I'm anticipating that is like your teen comes home and goes to their room. In the chat, if that is what you are asking, just say yes. Because I don't want to answer it incorrectly. How do you help a teen navigate an unbalanced relationship in 8th grade? In these ways, right? So a lot of times we think about 8th graders and high schoolers because 8th grade is in middle school. 8th and 9th grade are actually more developmentally similar than they are in middle school. 9th graders, right? So being able to talk to them in the same way and helping them balance, ask them those questions, come to it from a place of curiosity and not judgment about this friend. And it's also really important to make sure that it is not coming out as a deficit in your child. That is why this is happening. That is why they're in an unbalanced relationship, right? It's just getting them to question, to think. And it might mean that it takes multiple small conversations over time. A long conversation will overwhelm them and they'll shut down. So that's one thing. But using these tools is really helpful and asking them questions to evaluate their friendship. No, there was no mistyping. Someone just said, sorry, there's no mistyping. It is, I just wanted to make sure that I understood it. So one of the things that is hard, my teen does that, and part of that is just natural. The other part is looking at, like, we have a home agreement, right? Like, we have a set of things. I am not good at keeping rules. We have checklists and we have an agreement that is like, when we read together, right? Like, we just have time where everyone in the family sits down with a book. We eat dinner together, even when my kid doesn't want to, right? We do these things together as a family and we talk that our family values is that we're going to spend some time. We play games together. So starting doing things where you actually have something to do with your child is a good way of getting them to stay near you. And sometimes it might be that they can be on their phone or doing what they want, but you're just sitting next to them. That's a start, right? It's literally physical proximity. And I think, how do you help a teen navigate an unbalanced relationship in 8th grade? But then I think, especially in this isolated pandemic, was a part of that. And I think it's hard because what we're noticing is that social regression, right? Kids have socially regressed in terms of their in their relationship skills, their social skills, all of that. So I think one of the things to think about with that isolation is giving them some time and space, and thinking about what the isolate, like, that's what I might respond to that in writing, only because that can be really complicated depending on your family's and their friends' families' reactions around COVID. It's a whole, there's so many factors with isolation. How do you ask or talk to your child about how far along they are in a relationship? She claims they haven't kissed yet, but I find that hard to believe. When I push her for information, she shuts out. So I'm going to be honest, she thinks you don't trust her. If she tells you she's just kissing, right, and you find it hard to believe, your spidey sense, right? Like, your spidey sense is going and you're like, I know there's more. Find other ways to talk about relationships in a more general sense, right? Like, how do they know that they're ready? And she might keep shutting you out, but the more you try, I'm also going to tell you the car is one of my favorite places to have discussions, because make them sit in the back seat and you get to sit in the front seat, or even if they're sitting next to you, there is an element of confrontation that gets taken out because you're moving, you're physically different. it's just a really different place. But I think you need to be careful about the pushing. And some of it can be more that you start having more general discussions about when you, like, you're in a relationship. So even if you haven't done more, let's talk about what you need if you want to. How do you know if you're ready to, right? Take the approach that they haven't gone further and start preparing her. I said her. Oh, yeah, because you said she. And start preparing her for how to be comfortable and how to trust herself and know when she's comfortable to go further. Because what that will do is set up trust with her, and then let you have conversations. It's kind of like you're talking, but you're not talking, right? Without having to push, without having to assert that your spidey sense is going off. I think that's going to be a losing battle. So I think we got it. Thank you all so much.
All right, be on the lookout for an email from us in Zoom with all of the great stuff. Come back in 2 weeks when Lisa's going to talk even more about sex and puberty and all of that good fun stuff. So hopefully you guys will join us then as well.
Yay!
But thank you, everyone. Yes, I will make sure to share, unless Lisa, you can throw it in the chat, the link to the Operation Snowball information.
Let me see. I don't have the flyer, but what I do have is at least the web page. So give me 1 second.
And we'll make sure to get the flyer out to everybody as well. So thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy the warmth. 50
Yeah.
Well, we have it.
And there's supposed to be like a major snowstorm coming Thursday night or Thursday. So
enjoy it while it lasts.
Enjoy it while it lasts. All right.